That worked well. So, good morning, everyone. We're still 15 minutes away from afternoon, so I'll say good morning. City Club members, friends, and community members, welcome. My name is Erica McAlpin, and I'm your City Club of Central Oregon Board President. Initially, I wasn't going to mention today being a historic day for City Club of Central Oregon. However, as I watched a prominent female leader announce that she would not seek re-election to leadership in Congress, I thought how long women and people of color were not able or invited to serve in leadership roles. As a result, I want to acknowledge that I'm the first Black American person to serve on the City Club board and to be elected president. So why is this important? It certainly isn't about me, but representation matters. It matters for young girls, women, and people of color to see someone that looks like them in leadership. I wouldn't be here, a woman from Bruton, Alabama, if it weren't for a few people that saw something in me. Bill Buchanan, if you're here today, thank you for having the courage and idea to develop a forum on politics, sex, and religion 5 years ago. Christine Coffin, thank you for always keeping an eye out for opportunities for the faculty and staff at OSU Cascades and inviting me to be a panelist on that forum. Blair Garland, thank you for inviting me to serve on the board. And to Jacob Fain, thank you for being brave and asking me to serve as your president-elect. To Jim Lucier and Stephen Hacker, I do hope that you are proud of what City Club has become, and I hope during this year of my tenure that we strengthen the mission of the organization, which is to build a conscious and civic-minded community through dialogue, education, and research that results in responsible, civic-minded engagement. As we transition to our 2023 Board of Directors, I would like to welcome Linda Orsoletto as our president-elect, and your newest board members, Christine Coffin, Daisy Lehman, and Carlos Salcido. The board would also like to thank Gwen Weisling for her years of service on the board and guiding us through some difficult transitions. When I think of Gwen, I think of a true servant leader. I've had the opportunity to work closely with her in her professional capacity as the executive director of Bethlehem Inn, and there is no other community that I would serve than the houseless community. So thank you for that work, and thank you for what you have brought to City Club. And we do have a small token to show our appreciation. And finally, I would like to thank past President Jacob Fain for his leadership over the past year. Before we get started, I would like to thank our community, platinum, and gold sponsors and partners: ASI Wealth Management, the City of Bend, COCC, OSU Cascades, St. Charles, Pacific Source, Central Oregon Association of Realtors, and Brooks Resources. Moderating our forum today is Zack Demars, Special Projects Reporter for the Bulletin, and I will now welcome Zack to the podium and turn the forum over to him.
Well, thanks so much, Erica, and thank you all. Great to see everybody again. Always a pleasure to be here at City Club. We've got a great and exciting. I'm really upselling it today. We've got an exciting panel today. I think hopefully we'll all learn something when we walk away today. So if I could have our panelists join us up front, and we will go ahead and get rolling here. So on our panel today, we have Rick Treleaven. He's the Chief Executive Officer at BestCare Treatment Services and Community Mental Health Director for Jefferson and Crook counties. Rick has worked in the fields of addiction and mental health since 1982. He's provided clinical services with diverse groups of people, including youth, families, veterans, victims of abuse, and people with severe and persistent mental illnesses. He's worked at all levels of the field as a volunteer, a therapist, a clinical supervisor, and as an administrator of programs. He's worked with BestCare since 1999 and has been the CEO since 2001. Mike Krantz joined the Bend Police Department as chief in August of 2020. Before that, Krantz served 27 years at the Portland Police Bureau and ended his time there as an assistant chief. Krantz holds a bachelor's degree in public policy and administration from Western Oregon University, a master's degree from the University of Charleston in organizational and strategic leadership. He's a graduate of the Perf Senior Management Institute for Police and holds an executive certificate from the Oregon Department of Public Safety Standards and Training. And last but certainly not least, Shawnda Jennings joins us today. She recently joined Ideal Option as the new peer outreach specialist in Bend. After moving to Central Oregon, she recovered from her own opioid addiction 5 years ago and became a mentor for others struggling with addiction. She spends time in local jails every week, speaking to inmates in hopes of getting them into services, and does outreach with the Deschutes County Sheriff's Office and into homeless camps in the community. She's the mother of a 15-year-old boy and enjoys being in nature, music, and candle making. Let's welcome our panel today. As you likely know, the topic of our discussion today is Measure 110, specifically where we are and where we're going with Measure 110 in Oregon and particularly in Central Oregon. So for a little bit of background, just so we're all kind of starting in the same place before we get into our panel, just a couple points of background to share. As you all likely remember, Oregon voters approved Measure 110 in the 2020 general election. That ballot measure was amended by the legislature the following year and decriminalized the possession of personal amounts of hard drugs in Oregon. Since February 1st, 2021, possession has been punishable by just a Class E violation, similar to many of the traffic tickets that you may have received on your way here. The tickets come with a fine of up to $100 and can be dismissed if a person receives a treatment needs screening. Then in May 2021, the Oregon Health Authority began releasing the first set of Measure 110 funds for addiction support and treatment services. Finally, about a year and a half later, in September of this year, the OHA finally completed approving upwards of $300 million in grants for more than 200 entities around the state to build out those addiction treatment services and treatment-related services. So that's a bit of background on where we've been with Measure 110. Maybe we'll see where we're going. Maybe not. There it is. Uh-oh. Oh, man. Lovely. Okay, so that's a bit of background on where we've been with Measure 110. Where we are right now with Measure 110 is a little bit harder to figure out. Since it's only been about 2 years, the really good data that we would want to know if it's working, and we'll talk about what it means by is Measure 110 working, but the really good data that we would want to figure that out, we don't quite have yet. So up here we've got a couple of the things that we do know about the state of addiction in Oregon. In the latest nationwide review of addiction treatment services, Oregon ranked 50th in the percentage of the population needing but not receiving treatment for substance use disorder. Drug arrests have decreased by more than half since decriminalization took effect, and just 8% of the Class E tickets given out for violation or for drug possession have been dismissed, which is that process that happens through the treatment needs screening. We also know that kind of on top of all of this Measure 110 context, we know that overdoses have been increasing in Oregon before and after the passage of Measure 110. They more than doubled, overdose deaths more than doubled between 2019 and 2021, and the number of those driven by fentanyl has increased 6 times in the same time frame. So that's a lot to parse through, but fortunately, this wasn't supposed to happen. There we go. We fortunately have some folks who are really helpful and really knowledgeable, far more knowledgeable than I am, who are going to help us parse through some of that. So, I want to start a bit with that $300 million that we talked about and the new services and new treatment options that are supposed to come available through Measure 110 funding. So, Rick, can you tell us a little bit about what BestCare is doing with your new funding from Measure 110 and how that fits into the broader picture of the new services that are coming to Central Oregon, hopefully, with that funding?
Sure. So I've been in the field for 40 years, and the direction that we're going is something we've known for 40 years we needed to do, and we've never been able to do. And I think Measure 110 was not organized really well. They should have set up the systems before they decriminalized, but this is Oregon. We decriminalized for 2 years. Then we think about setting up the systems. But this is really a huge opportunity. What we're really trying to do is reach out to that population of people with serious substance use disorders, okay, serious addictions. And so I had to make the list because we're setting up quite a bit. So in collaboration with Deschutes County Health Services, we've set up a 7-day-a-week engagement center. And Barrett Hamilton, stand up, he's going to be running our engagement center. And it's just at 4th and Marshall. And so that provides rapid access, immediate access to start treatment, rapid access for medication-supported recovery services, naloxone supplies, needle exchange, employment counseling, housing vouchers, houseless supplies, things like sleeping bags, clothes, cleaning supplies, non-judgmental, low-barrier environment. We're also providing homeless outreach recovery mentors specific for opioid users. Embedding recovery mentors in our detox, safe and sober housing for pregnant mothers who are IV drug users, and a recovery house for people on medication-supported recovery. And so that's just BestCare, and there's a group of, how many, like 6, 8 agencies working in Deschutes County that's providing the services. Ideal Options, one of them. And then BestCare also has similar services happening in Jefferson and Crook County, and we're working closely with the Klamath tribe down in Klamath Falls. Mouthful.
Absolutely, yeah, and you touched on, kind of those basic needs services, the sleeping bags, the tents, those sorts of things that you'll be able to provide with the engagement center. Can you kind of walk us through what does that have to do with addiction treatment? What's the link there?
So we've been providing outreach services into the emergency departments at St. Charles, all 4 hospitals, for a number of years now. And then we've also been, through some grants, providing outreach services to pregnant women who are IV drug users. And so what we've learned is a few things. You need to start where that person is, not where you want them to be. And so our experience, like with the pregnant women, and mind you, there's nobody more stigmatized in this society than a pregnant woman who's shooting drugs, okay? And those women know it. And so if you start with, hi, I'm Rick, I'm from BestCare, you want treatment, they will run away. You'll watch them run across the parking lot, literally. But if you start with where they're at, what do you need, They're often living with domestic violence, they're couch surfing, they need diapers, they need support, and you develop the relationship, then much of the time, up to 50% of the time, you can engage them in time into treatment and recovery services. So the strategy here is start where people are, where their perceived needs are. You develop the relationship, and many of those people, not all of them, but many of them you can ultimately engage in recovery services, or at least harm reduction services. So at least they minimize the damage doing to themselves. So that's the strategy.
And we talked quite a bit about peer mentorship and peer counseling, and Shawnda, that's kind of your world. That's exactly what you do with Ideal Option. So,
may I just say, Shawnda is the star of this presentation. Chief Krantz and I are just like, whatever, but she's actually doing the work.
So yeah, Shawnda, can you tell us a little bit about what that work is that you do, and why is your own personal experience, how is it a part of that work, and why does it matter to the clients you work with?
Okay. As a peer mentor, my job is to walk beside individuals suffering from substance use disorder, to get them into services, and to help identify the barriers that they might be facing. I believe that having the relationship with these individuals and letting them trust you is a big, huge factor in that. Right now, I'm currently going down to the homeless camps every Thursday with Project Share Shepherd's Ministry, as well as going to the Deschutes County Jail on Tuesdays to speak with inmates to get them engaged into services. It's just letting them know that there is hope out there, and there is people like myself that have turned my life around, and I wouldn't have been able to do it without the mentors in my life. And I believe it's a huge full circle that I have came to, and to be able to do this is a huge blessing, and I'm very grateful for that. There's a lot of people dying out there, and it's really sad, and it touches me to a deep level, because I personally have lost my father and brother to suicide intentional overdose to drugs. So I'm able to relate with those individuals. The houseless community, they need a lot of help. And being there and being consistent, a lot of times they're not ready for it, but as long as you're consistently there and they know that you're there for them, they'll reach out when they're ready. And just having that being able to relate with them is one of the most important factors into this that I believe. The Burns Grant has given me the opportunity to do this. I am with Ideal Options, and we got the contract to work into the jails, which should start January 1st, as well as opening another location in Redmond. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity, and it really warms my heart to see an individual be able to turn their life around.
And the clinics that Ideal Option has and will have are medication-assisted treatment. Can you tell us a little bit about just what MAT is and why it's important to this kind of work?
Okay. Medicated assisted treatment, I believe it's a very important factor for individuals to stay clean. It is medication to help them with their cravings and let them be able to get their life back on track. I do believe that it's important, but also I feel that it's a really important component is to take care of their mental health and their primary care. So it's my job to get them connected with counseling. If it looks like drug and alcohol treatment, that really helps individuals turn their life around, as well as engaging into 12-step recovery meetings.
And so, Chief Krantz, Measure 110 has looked very different in your world. Can you tell us a little bit about how it's changed, what and how the department prioritizes drug calls, and how it changes your ability to respond to those?
Yeah, thank you. First, I just want to say thank you for the people here today. I don't think we can stress enough how important it is for leaders in our community to pull back the covers and the negativity and the stigmatization around addiction disorder. When we all look at it in the face, that's when we'll start finding solutions. And it's important for everyone here not to leave here with just, I learned something new. Take that forward in whatever capacity you can. Everyone in this community, I would imagine, has some sort of connection or has been affected in their family and their friends, loved ones with some sort of addiction disorder. And it's destructive. It destroys families, it destroys lives for generations. It's not just the person involved. So take that with you today. There's been a huge change around law enforcement, and this was very impactful. I've said it before in a couple different public entities, and Zack spoke on it a little bit. This was very poorly put out. The intent was terrific, but why weren't we given $330 million to addiction disorder treatment prior to a ballot measure coming forward decriminalizing something? Addiction disorder treatment has been underfunded, underprioritized in the state for years. I've worked in narcotics for the vast majority of my enforcement life. I arrested a lot of people with a lot of drugs. What we have seen is a de-emphasis on the criminalization side, which is terrific because I don't think anyone wants us, no police officer I know wants to send someone to prison for possession because they have an addiction disorder. We want to see them get treatment. The flip side of that is for, thank you, it's important. The flip side of that is for years, we were the people on the street doing that work. No one else was doing it. And now what we're seeing is starting around homelessness response, crisis response, addiction disorder. We're starting to see organizations who are now funded at some level, probably still not enough, be that front line where police officers used to be there. And our only mechanism was criminalization, so a possession of controlled substance charge. That was the mechanism. To get someone into the door of what we thought at the time as a society would be the way to force someone into treatment. And I can't still argue with that that's not a good mechanism. There has to be at some level an ability to get someone into that door, however it is. It could be the lowest point, could be an overdose where they're at the hospital. That's the time where they may accept that. It could be a family member, it could be a child issue. There's a lot of things that get people in that door and take that first step, or at least start thinking about it, trust building. And for us, that's what we did. We were cops, we're on the street, it was against the law, and no one else was out there doing it. And we're starting to see that now. But the impact has been huge for law enforcement and how we do our work now. The possession of a controlled substance was a crime. That gave us a lot of inroads when we had contacts in the street and someone was in a possession of contraband, which was then criminal. A vast majority of on-street users, and I won't say everybody because it's never an all or nothing, but a vast majority of are also involved in supporting their habit through criminal acts. A lot of times that support looked like theft, ID theft, car theft, whatever else they got into, robbery, a lot of other things in contraband. So we would have a criminal reason to contact somebody. For instance, when a neighbor calls and says someone's smoking meth in their car in front of my house, we would have a legal reason to contact that person. Now, that is a violation. We no longer have a legal reason other than a violation where we want to write a citation to take that any further. And there's no criminal nexus unless we identify additional articulable facts to say, okay, now this is a crime like I see other contraband. But just a meth pipe, for instance, previously, we could articulate that that was most likely related to and give us reasonable suspicion for a felony crime. So there's big impacts there as far as how we do our work, and it has reduced our ability to use drugs as an inroad to additional criminal factors, which it is a huge tool for law enforcement, was a huge tool for law enforcement. So that's had a big impact on overall crime interdiction and crime suppression, especially when that leads you into bigger criminal acts. Kind of the vice versa side of that, it also has a big impact to the community. I don't believe the community really knew that what it means when someone's smoking meth in front of your house, we can't do anything to take them away. What we can do at most typically is come up and write a citation if we develop facts around the violation. But that is not really an effective use of our time. We're a small police department in Bend for given the service demand. Us spending 2 hours making contact, write a citation, take evidence, do the reports behind that for what is a Class E $100 ticket violation that requires nothing to be done and it can be ignored with no consequences is not a good use of time. So overall, I don't want to take it too long, but I think our true leaders in the future around this will be our providers, and on the forefront, out contacting people where they're at the time, and taking those little opportunities they have to potentially get someone into the next step.
Yeah, just to add, I mean, I think the history in Oregon is that, and I've always believed that having sort of a stick and carrot approach to folks with addiction makes a lot of sense. And we've, in the past, had an all-stick approach, and then this seems to be an all-carrot approach. And so I suspect over the long haul, we might end up somewhere in a balanced position. One hopes, but you never know. This is Oregon.
And we talked a little bit before about fentanyl and how, the drugs that are in our communities are different than they were even 2 years ago. I'm wondering if kind of each of you can touch on how that's impacted your angle on this work, the increase in fentanyl and how it impacts the efficacy, if it does impact it, the efficacy of Measure 110 and how well that's going to be effective.
Well, I think fentanyl, I think in 40 years in this field, I've never seen it be more dangerous to be a severe drug addict as right now. It's crazy out there. And I've even seen some of our MAT providers tell folks to try to use heroin as a harm reduction to fentanyl. It's like, that's crazy in my head, but it's true, right? And then it's mixed in with a bunch of the other drugs, so people can be on fentanyl and not know it. So we end up with these overdoses because it's very difficult for folks to judge the intensity of the drug that they have, the purity is, and it makes total sense for Mexican cartels to go to this because they don't have to deal with poppy farmers and all that processing. It's way simpler, way cheaper to produce this stuff in labs in Mexico and just ship it up. So this is wild, wild west out there, and there's a lot of people dying, or now the naloxone, when we first started getting heroin in the area, 1 or 2 doses would be fine.
Can you define what naloxone is?
Okay, so naloxone's been around a long time, and it is a medication that your opiate receptors in your brain prefer over anything else. But once it's in your receptors, it's inert. It doesn't do anything. So what it does is it bounces out all the other opiate medications that are in there, and so it will reverse a overdose immediately. The person is usually quite unhappy about that event, and so usually the advice is step back a little ways so they don't slug you. And actually, I had an ER doctor that I knew back in the 80s try this out. He went for a 10K run and came back to the ER and gave himself a shot of naloxone. And he said, "Oh my God, it made me feel so bad. I was aching everywhere. All the nice endorphins that you get from running, that was just immediately kicked out." So that's sort of what naloxone does in a big way. But now we're needing to give people, 6, 7 doses just to survive.
Right. 6 and 7, that's a lot of Narcan to give someone.
Yeah.
And it's really, it's heartbreaking. I've never seen it as bad as it is right now. And I'm just kind of overwhelmed with the fentanyl and addiction going on right now. And
Impacts of fentanyl. So a lot of folks may not know the really down and dirty of fentanyl, right? It began as a prescription, China. It was brought out of Mexico, organized by the cartels, brought up as that was the beginnings pieces of it. It eventually got taken over by the cartels on dirty lab manufacturing in Mexico because it was much cheaper. They don't have to deal with the China companies. And it has taken over all of the heroin production, or the vast majority of it. Evidence of that in that for 2021, there was less than 1 kilogram of fentanyl seized in Oregon. In 2022, so far, that's gone up 2,500%. Vice versa on heroin. It's really hard to find heroin on the streets right now. Those seizures have gone down to almost, from years of very high seizures to almost nothing in 2022. So it has taken over the entire market for a couple reasons. Much easier to produce, it's much cheaper, you can hide it a lot easier. If you are a fentanyl user, a dose is $1 to $5. A dose of heroin is $20 typically, or cheaper, but depending on where you're at in the country. But that's the ease of getting the product now is so much less. And that's the challenge that we'll continue to be faced with. Is it was a little more difficult to get $20 and support a $200 a day habit. Now it's much easier to get $1 to $5 and support a $20 a day habit with much more dangerous material. It's not prescribed. It's not produced in any sort of laboratory that you think they would be, right? We don't know if it's a pin amount or they put way too much. It's just kind of whatever and mix it with whatever else that seems to be around, and then it's packaged in pill form or powder. It's colorful. They make it now very tempting for children. Our families, our kids, our coworkers, our friends are dying from fentanyl in this country at massive rates, and it's just the beginning.
I believe it's poison, and
Absolutely.
100%. It's
And just to go to the economics, when I started in the field in the 80s, sort of an entry-level heroin addict was looking at a $200 a day habit, given 1980s $200. Now it's pennies on that. So
It's like playing Russian roulette with your life. These young kids and individuals, I mean, one hit of fentanyl and you're dying. Like, you never know what you're gonna get and how much of it. It's really, really scary.
And it's getting mixed in with the other drugs. So
Right.
people think they're using meth, and we get them into treatment, and they start opiate withdrawal.
I'm wondering if we can kind of go back in time a little bit. We know Oregon has some of the highest rates of addiction in the country and some of the lowest rates of access to treatment in the country. Can any of you kind of touch on how we got there? How did we arrive at this kind of double worst position?
It's a complicated and gory story that the Oregonian covered about 5 years ago in depth. But, you know, Oregon came into the Union in 1859 as the least churched state in the Union, and still is. Has the fewest church-going in the population. So we don't have a group of Baptist ministers or Mormon folks who are advocating for a higher beer tax and more treatment. And so, but we do have a lot of breweries, and we like our beer, and we like our marijuana. And that's just the lay of the land. You know, you can argue it or not, but we've supported the breweries, we've supported legalization of marijuana, and we have also subsequently generations not funded treatment. And and when marijuana legalization occurred, then that was sold that a large portion of those marijuana tax dollars would go to treatment. And the very first thing the legislature did is take that money away. And so treatment never saw any of that marijuana tax dollars monies. Again, classic Oregon move. So that's where Measure 110 really just swept up all the marijuana tax dollars and put that into treatment as a reaction to that. So, yeah, it's a long and gory story. but we don't want to waste our time on that one.
Sure. I want to talk about the idea of success with Measure 110. We heard that 2 out of the 3 major candidates for governor in the election talk about Measure 110 as a failure and talk about repealing it. And what I still haven't found is what is a success for Measure 110. So I'm curious to get your perspective on that. What does this success look like for drug decriminalization in Oregon, and how do we know if it's working?
I'll start. And,
Rick's taking it. Thank you.
and we can have a discussion with this. So I came up with four outcomes that I think as a broad public we should be paying attention to. So one, what's the number of people with serious substance use disorders who are engaged? Okay. The number of overdoses, are they going up or down? Are we having an impact out there in the community? What is the rate of drug-related crimes going on? Is that going up or down? Is this approach actually, because I'm a citizen of this community, I don't want drug-related crimes happening in my neighborhood. And the number of people entering and staying in treatment and in recovery. So I think those are the sort of the 4 key numbers that we want to be looking at. And this is a grand social experiment. I don't know whether it will work or not, but we're here and we're going to try to make it work. So, Chief.
Yeah, success. I think, from my, lens of success for what we deal with is obviously a reduction in criminal activity around drugs and drug-related, and that could be a whole variety of things. I mean, in my estimation, at least 80% of the criminal acts that we report, go on, respond to, have some sort of drug relation, whether it be for the drug, because of the drug, a fight because they're high, child abuse because of drug activity in the household, DHS removal of children because of drug activity and behavior that comes with it. So criminal reporting statistics, obviously, in a reduction in the long term. I think something that is often overlooked but can't be forgotten is a reduction of children in the DHS system. Children get taken away a lot of times around drug addiction and disorder because of the things that are going on in a household or around the children. It's unsafe. That is a number that this state, frankly, can't get a grip around. There's way too many children in the system that have nowhere to go and no resources. So reduction in that. I think the availability of someone who is at the point of readiness for entering some sort of treatment, if we can measure success by that person being able to enter it that day when they want to, that's huge. Waiting for 2 weeks, waiting for 2 months, getting on a wait list and being called, that will never work. So have we funded our programs to do the work enough to where it's available right then, at the point when they wake up in the hospital out of an overdose, because that's when it has to be available. So those are just some points off the top, but I think all 3 would be pretty impactful.
Absolutely, I agree with you, especially that fast access to services, I believe is really crucial, especially when you're dealing with opiates. I would have to say housing is a really big barrier that we're discovering, and I think that more sober living houses would be crucial for individuals as well as detox facilities. It makes it really hard for individuals to get clean on the streets. So the more the community works together, the better we can do to solve this issue.
Kind of follow up on Shawnda's comment there. I maybe not focused enough on that, and not from personal experience, but I've been in my experiences have seen a lot. When someone is in the throes of addiction and disorder and they don't have stable housing, they will never get to the next step. Mm-hmm. They just won't. Your primary basic needs is shelter, right? You will never get to the next step. So building that into somehow the funding for addiction treatment will be something to measure and look at too. We can hope all we want, but it will never be.
So I want to jump on something Chief Krantz said around child abuse is Yeah, so the child welfare system in the state is pretty close to collapse and has been for years. And it's pretty disastrous. And if you're not aware of that, you should be. It's morally shameful what Oregon does in that area. And it's this multi-generational pattern. 80% of the folks that we see at BestCare have pretty serious child abuse histories. Just huge amounts of trauma if you get into that. So, and then they pass it on, right? And their children are raised in this. And so those of us, like the chief and I have been in the field a long time, we see literally the multi-generations of it all. So, if I were to, if the new governor were to talk to me, I would say do something about what we're doing in child welfare, because it's a disaster.
And Shawnda, I want to dive a little more into the housing piece that you mentioned. Can you tell us a little bit about what that's like for you as somebody who, tries to help people get that housing when they are maybe getting into treatment or getting out of jail? What are the challenges that you face in trying to find folks housing, and how difficult a process is that for you?
Well, it's really hard when you have an individual where that's all they need to actually move towards the next step, and not being able to offer that for them is really hard. I mean, I can refer them to the warming shelter, and I'm at the warming shelter every Friday, and that is a place you wouldn't want anyone to stay that you dearly love. And I don't know, I feel like it's one of the hardest issues that we're dealing with, and it really does touch me, and it's heartbreaking. Yeah.
So I want to kind of talk about this idea of moving forward now, moving forward with Measure 110. And let's kind of start broad and think about, structural changes. Are there, structural changes? I'm sure we'll see something about Measure 110 in the next legislative session. That seems fairly likely. Are there things that you hope that the legislature or other state leaders take up when they're looking at potential fixes to the problems of Measure 110?
Rick?
Please.
I can start a little bit around how I certainly don't have the solutions around how to change some of the laws, but when we were kind of spitballing this around a bit, about law enforcement work being on the front lines. We have those contacts with people all day, all the time. We really have the ability to listen to their stories, know what's going on. We generally get a pretty good idea if it's an addiction issue that's causing some of the issues. And we've talked a little bit theorizing about, do we recriminalize and force more of what the vast majority of the counties were doing anyways, which was drug court, where by the time you get contacted by the law enforcement officer and arrested, you have probably had some pretty significant use and addiction issues, and that has led to a lot of problems. Do we recriminalize it at a misdemeanor level that at least gives us a road in, and then force counties to install drug courts specifically that has treatment as requirements as part of that? I can tell you, and I know from just experience and talking to a lot of people in addiction for years and years in my career, without some sort of motive, there is not a lot of motive. And I'll use it around, without some forced mechanism, there isn't a lot of motive to do the next step unless something really bad happens in your life. That's typically when it happens. The choice isn't just, today I think I'll go get clean. Very rarely. I talked a little bit with our group about when someone is at the points to where they are contacted by law enforcement, arrested, frequently in their life, and reframe it a little bit in your own mind, is it's not just, oh, they made some choices to use drugs, bad stuff, right? Those were their choices. Addiction disorder is more serious than that. They have gone through life and started probably like everybody in here at some point, and had things, had family, had jobs, had cars. They have lost everything to that point. They have decided the drug is more important than a place to live, more important than a car, more important than family connections, more important than their job that they lose, more important than children, more important than dignity when they're on the street and they have nowhere to go, more important than being warm. The only thing left is freedom. And how important is that at that point? It's not even that important because arrest is typically not feared. In fact, if you had connections and you were someone who had a family member who was in addiction, frequently what you do is wish for their arrest because it's the only place you know they're going to be safe, at least for a night, and maybe start them in the process. And I've had a lot of those family members talk to me over the years, and I think to set up some sort of, as Rick put it, carrot stick mechanism where there has to be a reason to move to that step is probably how we move forward at some level.
I agree on that. I think it is absolutely, I mean, my opinions are my opinions, but I feel like legalizing something that is ultimately killing an individual and their families, I don't get it. I think that there needs to be some sort of implementation of accountability. Like he was saying, a lot of times people wait until they get arrested because it's like the time they can get rescued. You know, a lot of the time you need to actually be taken out of your situation physically and be held accountable. So I'm hoping that there's some sort of accountability moving forward.
So I'll say it's slightly different. I'm not opposed to what they just said. That may be true. We've never tried it the other way. So I don't know whether decriminalizing and having an army of recovery mentors and safe and sober housing will work or not. That's the experiment that we're on. So I think it's an experiment. I'm willing to watch this experiment. I've seen the downsides of the war on drugs, and people who end up with felonies on their records are not able to go to social work school like I did. They're not able to become licensed clinical social workers. They're not able to be community mental health directors.
They're not able to get a job. They're not able to get housing. They're not able to get much, right?
And so there's downsides to that approach too, and I've seen those damages. So I've been in the weeds in how this actually got rolled out. So there's some weedy stuff that I would like to, if I had the governor elect here in the room, I would say add real expertise to the Oversight and Accountability Committee that oversees this. So when they named the 20 members of this committee, there are 2 people who had ever run a grant program, and they're running a $300 million grant program, and none of the other people had even written a grant. They were, just line staff and advocates. So this was, and then they got no staff support from the professional staff at OHA. So it's like, as a CEO of a nonprofit, I'm like, oh my word, I've never seen anything. It's jaw-dropping how bad it was. Clean up the administrative processes. This can't happen again. They need to invest in co-occurring mental health and SUD services. They specifically excluded that. That's crazy. People don't come in little tiny categories. They come in as whole cloth. Believe you me, they have a lot of co-occurring mental health. I would also make it the policy of the state of Oregon that substance use treatment should be encouraged for all who could benefit from it. And so too much of we haven't done that here locally, but too much of the Oversight and Accountability Committee was focused on harm reduction. And what we have tried to implement here locally is that there should be this continuum from harm reduction, outreach, engagement, treatment, recovery supports that includes recovery, safe and sober housing. So we should have that full continuum of services for these folks. So we want to have that. I would then broadly say that you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So we've had large bipartisan majorities of voters who have repeatedly supported greater treatment and recovery services. The people of the state of Oregon have said that repeatedly. Using marijuana tax to fund this desire by the voters is ideal. And can we imagine Oregon going from the worst state in the union for access to one of the best? That's what this opportunity is about. So those would be if I had the governor here, that's what I would. And of course, they don't listen to me, but whatever.
Yeah, can you define harm reduction for us?
So harm reduction is things like, okay, so you're going to continue to use. Let's make that less risky for you.
Meeting them where they're at.
Meeting them where they're at. So let's make sure we get clean needles for you instead of using dirty needles. Let's see if we can decrease the incidence of hepatitis C in this population. Let's see if we can get you to not use fentanyl and use something else, decrease your use, or decrease your drinking. So you're not, maybe you won't drive when you're drinking. How about that? So those are all strategies around harm reduction. Or you're homeless and let's get you a tent. Okay. And with a lot of harm reduction approaches, then you develop relationships, and then that's what moves people. So that's what you're looking for.
And we'll get to audience Q&A in just a minute, so if you have questions you want to share with our panel, there's information on your tables on how to do that. But one last question from me for you all. We talked about kind of those big structural statewide things. If the governor and the legislature, happen to listen to us, or if they don't, we can't really predict that at this point. But are there things that you all would like to see locally, or things that you think we could do locally as a community to kind of fill some of those gaps in spite of whatever the state chooses to do with Measure 110?
Yeah.
Don't all jump at once.
I mean, we could rely on state for a lot of things, but I think what we see with state funding, slow, state programs, questionable about how they roll out and the way they roll out and the effectiveness of them. So a lot of the potential lies with our providers in the area, and Ideal Options. Sorry, thought I missed it. Partnering with law enforcement, doing those front contacts on the street. So I think the building capacity around that immediate contact, and a little bit selfish, taking some of that away from the police who goes out and does that work frequently when it's not really involving criminal behavior that we need to address. That's a public safety concern. So there's some benefit there, working through Deschutes County to continue to support their increases in their crisis response, their homelessness response teams, their addiction response teams. Those are all impactful and important options that we can look at locally, but those have to be funded. Those have to be supported by the community, and priority has to be put on that over other uses of those dollars.
So one of the missions that I've been having at BestCare for many, many years is trying to develop this full continuum, right? So what I believe that we need as a community is, what is our outreach to folks with serious substance use disorders? How do we engage those folks in the community? The police it's underappreciated how much social work the police do. And many of officers know these folks better than anybody else, right? And they actually have some heart for them. I think, we've always had a very collaborative approach with law enforcement. But I think we need this continuum of outreach, engagement, building evidence-based, outcomes-driven treatment services, and long-term recovery supports, including recovery, safe and sober housing, and easy access back into treatment services. Because, you know, treatment is not 28 days and Sandra Bullock is sharing your room. I'm sorry. Doesn't look like that. And it's a long-term chronic disease, and it takes a lot of work and ups and downs with it. So we want to be there in the long haul. I think that's the thing. I think more broadly, and it's been spoken here, Oregon and the country in general has a huge housing crisis. I would note that since the early 80s, we've been defunding HUD at the federal level and access to affordable housing, and that's come up and bit us in the ass right now. And so if someone is marginally making it in a studio apartment, well, studio apartments go for more than my mortgage out in Tumalo, right? This is crazy. And so they're forced into homelessness. And guess what? Your mental health will collapse if you're forced into homelessness. You will use substances as a way of coping with the disaster that's become your life. So everything crumbles really fast if you become homeless. So let's pay attention to the direction of cause and effect here. It's often two ways.
One addition, unless Shawnda, you had?
No, I agree with both of you. You did it great.
I think along the lines we've been talking about a lot about what to do, you know, around meeting them where they're at, providing services, providing some treatment. I think as a community also we have to expect that our organizations will also hold people accountable for their behavior. That's something that we can't forget. A lot of crime, a lot of violence comes with drug use and open air drug markets and drug dealing. We should ensure as a community we also don't accept that behavior that comes with it. It's not an excuse. It's not an excuse to hurt other people and to cause harm to the community and to steal and to wreck cars and be behaved in that and involved in that behavior. We also shouldn't accept that yes, possession disorder is something completely different than people who prey on our community to sell drugs. That's a commercial enterprise, and we should request and expect that those folks are fully prosecuted according to our laws.
And I would fully support that. I would just say that recovery from substance abuse is about taking responsibility and acting responsibly in your own life and in your community. And so, and if you can't do that, you won't stay in recovery. So, totally in alignment with that.
Agree.
Well, let's go ahead and dive into your questions here. We had a couple questions about acronyms that came up. One was SUD that you may have heard throughout our conversations. That stands for Substance Use Disorder. Another acronym you may have heard was BHRN, B-H-R-N. That stands for Behavioral Health Resource Network, which is a complicated way of saying that's how the Measure 110 funds get to our communities. So just some background there. So we have a question here about the impact of Measure 110 on policing and police resources. It asks specifically about crowding in prisons, but you know, if Measure 110 has impacted, you know, prison space, jail space, but I think also officer time and you know, department resources, frontline is an important part of that as well.
Yeah, there's it's changed. Like I said, a little bit about change the way we police and how we police. There's still an impact, though, on the street and for the service demands of our officers and doing the work every day. A lot of that comes because there's still a lot of criminal activity that supports addiction. There's still a lot of violence that comes along with addiction. In fact, I would say there's more happening now on the street because of addiction, because we no longer have like a way to go out and intercede in that until it becomes a crime. Take an example of someone smoking meth in front of a house or in a parking lot. We get those calls a lot now. we don't really do a whole lot until that person then has behavior that's because of that, like violence or kicks a car or screams at people. So it actually extends that behavior and makes it worse. As far as prison crowding, I'm not a prison expert. However, I will tell you from experience of 30 years in this line of business, for possession of a controlled substance, people were not going to prison. That was a false lead from ballot measure 110. Now, there was eventually sentences that came along. If there was additional criminal acts, if there was parole probation that was failed over and over and over again, there would be sanctions. But if I arrested somebody for possession of 2 grams of methamphetamine, they were not going to prison. Sometimes we couldn't get people in prison who was selling 2 pounds of methamphetamine. So that wasn't happening. But so I don't know how much of a actual relief it has provided to the correction system.
And our other question are on the treatment side, a lot of funding available for treatment and for new treatment staffing, peer counselors. Is there the workforce to fill those roles? What is the impact of one of Oregon's other crises on your ability to fill those roles?
My number one headache, wrote up the strategic plan last month with the board. My number one strategic headache is staffing. So the result has been a good thing in that staff salaries have been going up. We now provide better benefits for our staff. And then what we've been forced to do, and I think this is a good thing, is we're creating a career path within the agency. So it's fairly easy to become a recovery mentor. And then those folks were willing to pay to get their certificate to become a drug and alcohol counselor. And those folks, if they're working well, we're willing to pay for further education. So we have an education benefit that we've built because we can't recruit, right? So we have to build our own. We have to grow our own. So I think that's a healthy development, and we have the funding to be able to do that. And we can't recruit staff. We have to build them. So.
And Shawnda, can you talk to us a little bit about, as a peer mentor, what was your process for kind of going from somebody with lived experience to being a peer mentor? Is there, education, certification involved in that? What does that kind of look like?
So last year I did a peer support training and co-occurring when I was working at Cascades Peer Support Help Center. So there is a 40-hour training that you can do with the state, and then you can build up on that, like Rick was speaking about, get your CADC, and just move up within your career.
CADC is Certified Alcohol and Drug Counselor.
And I think we heard a little bit the word co-occurring at various points. Can you touch on what co-occurring means?
Mentally ill, yeah. Am I saying that correctly in terms?
You're doing great. So, so co-occurring is a range of things. So really trying to treat people with mental illnesses and substance abuse at the same time and treat both. And my experience with opiate addicts is that they live in this never land between life and death. They often don't care whether they wake up. Someone will die and we'll sit in the meeting reviewing the case and was this intentional or not? And often they don't care. The level of depression, anxiety, major health problems is huge. People can also have very serious mental illnesses, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and be using as a way of self-medicating. And so it's instead of like saying, oh, you have to have alcohol and drug treatment here and mental health here, we're going to address both at the same time. And we're going to also work with your primary care physician to deal with chronic pain, other life problems, health problems, because they all go together, right? And so you have to treat people whole cloth, or you're really providing ineffective treatment.
So this next question about kind of how enforcement works, or how officers are going out and interacting with folks using drugs. And the question specifically asks, when you issue a ticket for that person smoking meth, like you gave in the example, is your team starting with how can I help you? Can you kind of talk us through what those conversations look like, and how how you approach those conversations as a department?
Every situation is really unique to the circumstance, so it's hard to say this is how it happens every time, but generally, the understanding is, our officers understand that the voters of the state passed a law that decriminalized, low-level possession of narcotics. So our goal is to understand how that is enforced by, reading the law, looking at it, our policies around what we do. We provide, if we do write a citation, which is very rare, as you can see in the entire state, citations are not being written for these violations. Like I said, there is a cost benefit of using those resources for 2 to 3 hours to do something that we know has no impact, because we can also give the same card with the same phone number for Lines for Life to them without giving the citation that has the phone number on the back of it. And then we don't have to do 2 to 3 hours of the work. And there is no outcome difference, meaning we can give them that card or we can give them a citation, and then we walk away and they stay there to continue to use drugs or do whatever activity they were doing. So there's no outcome change. I always ask our officers to evaluate the need, evaluate what your time is being used for. Do we have more priority calls, which most of the time we do. However, in the state, we were some of the higher utilizers in 2021 of the citation, which was still very low numbers for statewide. But what we saw was that, the conversation is different every time, but we have the resource contacts and numbers. Again, we're not any better than anyone else to forcing somebody into treatment. All we can do is provide this is who you can call, and if we do the citation, this is who you should call to get the $100 citation dropped. But again, there is no consequence to not doing anything with it. So the vast majority of time, that's why the 8% number was up there, was because only 8% are getting dismissed, because the other 92% are getting ignored, or somewhere around there.
Yeah, one of the things I forgot to mention, get rid of that whole component. Everyone ignores it. Please, we have enough jokes to deal with, so.
Are there models of other states that are doing this well? They're treating addiction well and caring for people with addiction well?
49 of them.
Yeah, when you're on the bottom, Mississippi looks good. I'm sorry.
Rick, can you talk to us about Portugal at all? Portugal is kind of the model that supposedly Measure 110 was supposed to be modeled after. Drug decriminalization seems to be working there. Is it working the same here in Oregon? I assume the answer is no. And if not, why not?
Well, in Portugal, what they did is set up the system of support services first, made sure that that was working, then they decriminalized. Okay, and so we're still in the midst of an experiment. Okay, so I think we had this idea that the war on drugs was a failure. Okay, I'll buy into that. But before we've set up the replacement system, we just decriminalized possession. And we don't know whether the replacement system that we're setting up will actually be effective or not. And to get to effectiveness isn't just setting up a bunch of do-gooder services. I mean, I make my living doing do-gooder services, mind you. But actually, it's a lot of detail about, is this really going to be effective? Is this really going to work? Are we making the right connections? Are we moving people in the right direction? And that takes a lot of work and a lot of behind the scenes grinding, where I'm sitting in meetings with Barrett and my staff, and are you doing this? What's the next step? Are we, what does our data look like? It's boring, but this is the stuff that makes it effective. And that takes years. of work to do that. And we haven't done that yet. So I think we did it in reverse order. And so even though I think this is like what I've been wanting to see my whole career, how we've pulled this off is just like, oh, Lord, you know, please, don't do it this way. But we're here. And so so then what we're trying to do right now is really create the effectiveness. And I think we have some promising practices, and we just need some time to do that grinding work to really begin to make sure that they're effective.
I think that's where we'll have to leave it for this afternoon. Shawnda, Chief Krantz, and Rick, thank you very much for your time and your insights. And as always, thank you all for joining us. It's always a pleasure to work with the City Club on these forums and share the Bulletin's reporting with you all. I'll pass it back to Kim Gammon.
Thank you. Thank you to Zack, Shawnda, Chief Krantz, and Rick for being here today and helping us in conversation. And thank you to the Bulletin for their continued partnership to help bring these important stories and discussions to our community. If you did not get a chance, there are 3 articles from Sunday on this topic that Zack has done. And then thank you for our elected leaders here today, our newly and re-elected leaders, Mike Riley, Kat Zwicker, and Jason Kropf. And then next month, on December 15th, join us for a very different kind of City Club forum. It's going to be On the Margins in Our Towns, an interactive discussion on local houselessness in Central Oregon. This forum will flip the script on our format with experts in the audience at the tables with a lot of time for discussion and questions. Registration is open now at cityclubco.org. If you are not currently a member, please take a moment to consider membership. You will receive a follow-up email today or tomorrow from me in regards to that. And then thank you for being here today. Please continue to cultivate conversation in our community about issues that we care about.